Genesis chapter 43. Let's remember where we are. Simeon is in jail because Joseph has put him there. And he's kind of there as a down payment, a security deposit for them coming back and bringing Benjamin. And when they got home and told Jacob what the deal was, he was just willing to leave Simeon over there. Unfortunately, the drought is not going to come to a conclusion anytime soon, and it's still severe, and they're going to have to do something. So we're going to start at the beginning of 43 and kind of look at some major themes. Hopefully all of us are already fairly familiar with what's going on. Chapter 43, verse 1 starts, "Now the famine was still severe in the land." And we're not just talking about the land of Egypt. We're talking about all of that area. The whole geography of the Middle East had been enveloped in this famine. And as a result, the land of Canaan, and as a result, Jacob and his family. So when they had eaten all the grain they had brought from Egypt, their father said to them, "Go back and buy us more food." Now we're at a big turning point in the history of the world right here, when Jacob says, "Go back and buy us more food." If they could have lasted out the drought and never had to go back and redeem Simeon, that may have been the way it worked out. But they can't. Jacob is hungry, his family is hungry, their families are hungry, and he's between a rock and a hard place. And as a result, he's going to have to do what he does not want to do. He's going to have to do something that he said he would never do. He's going to have to let his youngest son, Benjamin, go with them down to Egypt. Skip down to verse 6. This is the conversation. This sounds like a daddy and his sons. Israel asked, "Why did you bring this trouble on me by telling the man you had another brother?" And they replied, "The man questioned us closely about ourselves and our family. 'Is your father still living?' he asked us. 'Do you have any other brothers?' We simply answered his questions. How were we to know that he would say, 'Bring your brother down here'?" So you can just see them around the kitchen table having this discussion. And Jacob is saying, "How in the world did you get me into this situation?" And they're saying, "We didn't have any clue what was about to happen. He caught us off guard, and as a result, we are where we are." Verse 8, Judah said to Israel his father, "Send the boy along with me, and we will go at once, so that we and you and our children may live and not die. I myself will guarantee his safety. You can hold me personally responsible for him. If I do not bring him back to you and set him here before you, I will bear the blame before you all of my life. As it is, if we have not delayed, we could have gone and returned twice." So more of that family around the kitchen table kind of discussion. So they're going to have to make a plan. They're going to have to come up with some way of getting what they need. So here are the things that I picked up on from their plan. Number one, Judah says, "I will protect Benjamin. I'm going to make sure that Benjamin is all right. And on my own honor and on my own life, I will make sure that Benjamin is okay." Now, how many of you think that Jacob would have traded Judah for Benjamin? Yeah. If it's going to cost Benjamin, he wants Benjamin. He doesn't want Judah to come back and say, "Well, I'll make it up to you. I'll take care of you. I'll do whatever Benjamin." He doesn't need that. Benjamin is the prize. And for Judah to say that, "I'll pay it back, I'll take care of it, it'll be on me that's not much assurance as far as Jacob is concerned. This is the last child of his one true love. And he's not easily going to send him, but he's up against a rock and a hard place. He really can't do anything to change his situation. So here are the instructions that he gives, beginning in verse 11. "If it must be, then do this. Put some of the best products of the land in your bags and take them down to the man as a gift. A little balm, a little honey, some spices and myrrh, some pistachio nuts, and some almonds. Take double the amount of silver with you. You must return the silver that was put back into the mouths of your sacks Perhaps it was a mistake. Take your brother also and go back to the man at once, and may God Almighty grant you mercy before the man, so that he will let your other brother and Benjamin come back with you. As for me, if I am bereaved, I am bereaved." He's already counting his losses. He's already sure that this is going to go south. But here's his game plan. Right? Judah's going to protect Benjamin. That's his job. Also, take with you silver. Make double silver so that you can say, well, we didn't mean for it to get back in our sacks. We're willing to pay you for the last load, and for this load too. We're going to make sure that our accounts are up to date. Take special gifts with you, and I like the list. I mean, if you're bringing me stuff, some balm, some honey, some spices, pistachios and almonds, I'd like that. That's a pretty good gift when somebody shows up at your door to bring you that sort of thing. And it's okay to take my son, and notice he says, "May God Almighty grant you mercy before that man, so he will let the NIV says other brother. So he'll let your other brother go. And Benjamin. Benjamin has a name. Simeon is the other brother, right? So, you can't miss the partiality here. People who were once very powerful and very productive are now having to beg. Right? This is not what Jacob does best. We don't know what he has left in his flocks and herds, but during a drought, feeding your flocks and herds becomes a problem, right? It hasn't been too many years that this area was in a horrible drought, lasted for a lot of years. Are we completely out of the drought yet? No, still going. I know that in Alva, we got enough rain 2 years ago that they finally said, well, we're just about caught up with where we need to be. But it's hit or miss. The clouds come up and you go, oh, maybe, and then, it doesn't come through. We don't know how they were doing as far as flocks and herds are concerned, but they can't feed themselves anymore. And when you're in that position, you have to do whatever the person who has the power wants you to do. You have to depend on the kindness of strangers. And if Jacob wasn't completely at the bottom of his game, he never would have bought into this arrangement. So he has to do what he has to do. I went over and read some stories, and I won't name any names, but in particular, I ran across two who, when I was a kid, were on TV and were very popular. And do y'all remember Tiger Beat magazine? It was aimed at teenagers, and it had the stars of different TV shows and musical personalities in it. Lots of pictures. Well, the kind of kids who were in that magazine, homeless. One of them in particular, who starred in several movies, was living on the streets, and a woman found her living in her front yard. And she confronted her about it, and she said, "I know you'd never know it to look at me, but I am." And she gave her name, and the woman called the authorities, and they came and were able to help her to some degree. But she was a major movie star, and then a few years later, she just has absolutely nothing. Life happens to people. And Jacob, he's the beginning of the nation of Israel. He is the father of the 12 tribes. And at this point in his life, he's having to beg to the point that he says, if I'm bereaved, then I'm bereaved. In other words, I got no other options. If I lose everything, I lose everything. So when they arrive in Egypt, they're about half expecting to get arrested. They know that they had the silver in their sacks, which wasn't supposed to be there. And so they're concerned that maybe when they get there that they're on the most wanted list. They're kind of expected to show up at the post office and have a line of pictures up there. But actually they get treated with a lot of respect. The folks are directed by Joseph to take them to his home and to show them every hospitality. Now, they're kept separate from the Egyptians, and we'll read a little bit about that in a minute, but they're in Joseph's own private residence, and they're so scared because they think that they've been taken there so that Joseph can take them prisoners. In fact, the phrase that got my attention was, he's going to arrest us, make us slaves, and take our donkeys. So, it's not bad enough he's going to make us slave. He's going to steal our donkeys, and we just don't need that. But the person who is in charge of them says, your God put that silver back in your sacks. You're not in danger. You're not under arrest. You are being treated with honor. And so he takes them to Joseph's residence to prepare them to have lunch with their older brother that they only know as that man who's in charge. Still a little confused, still a little scared, but at least they know that life is better than they thought. Go down to verse 24. The steward took the men into Joseph's house, gave them water to wash their feet, and provided fodder for their donkeys. When I think foot washing, I think New Testament. This is several hundred years before that, right? It was just a common courtesy. They came in off the road, they were dirty, gave them water to wash their feet, and provided fodder for their donkeys. Didn't steal their donkeys, gave them something to eat. They prepared their gifts for Joseph's arrival at noon because they had heard that they were to eat there. When Joseph came home, they presented him with the gifts they had brought into the house, and they bowed down before him. Now, they don't know it yet, but Joseph knows what's going on. You and me, we know what's going on, right? We read the first chapter over here. We read about the visions. We read about the sun and the moon and the stars bowing down, and we read about the sheaves of grain bowing down. Absolute direct fulfillment of the prophecies that God gave to Joseph as a young man. Now, it took 25 years maybe for all of this to come about. So he's been in Egypt a long time. He's been separated from his father even longer. But God is doing everything God showed him that he would do. He asked them how they were, and then he said, how is your aged father that you told me about? Is he still living? They replied, your servant, our father, is still alive and well. And they bowed down, prostrating themselves before him. So you've got two different kind of connotations. When I think bowing, I almost think Eastern greeting, right? You just kind of bow at the waist. But when you get to prostrating yourself, these guys were on their faces in front of Joseph. They were, how low can you make yourself? You ever watch The King and I? And Yul Brynner spends like the whole movie saying your head must not be higher than the head of the king. You have to just get down as low as you have to get to make sure that your head is not higher than the head of the king. So they are on the ground in front of him. And as he looked about him and saw his brother Benjamin, his own mother's son, he asked, is this your youngest brother, the one you told me about? And he said, God be gracious to you, my son. Deeply moved at the sight of his brother, Joseph hurried out and looked for a place to weep. He went to his own private room and wept. Isn't that a beautiful picture? On the one hand, you have this compassionate, loving sweetheart of a guy who is so moved by the sight of his brother that he tears up and he has to excuse himself to go cry in private. The other half of this guy is just absolutely messing with all of his brothers, Benjamin included. Benjamin doesn't know he's bowing down to his brother. None of these guys know what's going on. So on the one hand, you've got a really wonderful guy, and on the other hand, he's just mean as he can be to his brothers. But they deserved it. They deserved every last bit of what he was giving to them. All right, so he washed his face, verse 31, came out and controlled himself and said, serve the food. Now, I want you to notice how they go about having this meal. You've got a group of guys from the area of Canaan, and they have traveled all this way to Egypt, pretty sure that they were going to be in big trouble when they got there. They show up, their brother is restored to them. They're all together in one place, wondering, is he going to put us as slaves? Is he going to steal our donkeys? What's he going to do? And little by little, they realize that, okay, he's not going to hurt us. Everything's going to be all right. But notice how they're treated. They served him by himself, that is Joseph, the brothers by themselves, and the Egyptians who ate with him by themselves. So you've got three different groups of folks that are getting fed because Egyptians could not eat with Hebrews. They are detestable to Egyptians. And that got me to thinking, how many different groups can you think of that wouldn't eat with some other group? And pretty much, if you have the power to decide who you're going to eat with, then you fall in that category. Sometime in your life, you were having a meal, and there was somebody that you knew that you really didn't want to eat with, and you did not invite them to sit down at your table. Yes? Do your head this way. You know you did it. At some time in history, every people group on the planet has excluded some other people group on the planet. Okay? If it was the next door neighbor group, or if it was a group from across town, or if it was a group the next nation over, people have excluded each other if they have the power to do it. Right? The Egyptians were the ones with the power, and so they would not sit down and eat with a Hebrew. Flash forward about 600-700 years after the children of Israel get back to Canaan and they set up residence in Canaan, part of their law was you don't eat with Gentiles. If an Egyptian showed up, the Egyptians would eat over there, the Hebrews would eat over here. You get to the New Testament, you've got Christians, some of them Gentiles, some of them Jews, meeting together at Antioch. And even the Apostle Peter shows up, and he won't eat with the Gentiles in Antioch, because for him, that was detestable. He grew up that way. So if you've got enough power to decide who you're going to eat with, you get to decide. If you don't have any power, then you eat where they tell you to eat. Right? And so here are these Hebrews, and their brother is the second in command of all of Egypt. They cannot eat with him because he's Egyptian and they're Canaanite. And so there's that kind of separation. Happens all over the planet, happened then, still happening today. The men had been seated before him in the order of their ages, from the firstborn to the youngest. And they looked at each other in astonishment. In other words, how does he know that? Good guess. When portions were served to them from Joseph's table, Benjamin's portion was 5 times as much as anyone else's. So they feasted and drank freely with him. Now notice it says they ate with him. Go back up a little bit. It says the Egyptians were eating with him, but he wasn't eating at the table with these folks. It was a little bit like, have you ever been to a banquet where there was a head table? I've had the experience in 2 different directions. I've had the experience where I came in and sat down at a regular table and they came up and said, since you're speaking, you need to be sitting at the head table. I've also had the experience where I had a friend who was speaking and I went up and sat with them at the head table and they said, you're not on the program, you need to go sit over there. So I've had it both ways, but evidently he had kind of the head table. It was his banquet, his home, his spot. So they fed him over here and fed the rest of them over there. When you were in school, was there a cool table? If you watch any movies from the 80s, there's always a cool table. I was too uncool to know I was uncool. So I just sat with whoever I was sitting with. We're going to leave that right there and pick up with the final episode of how Joseph finally lets them know who he is and brings Jacob and the rest of the family to live in the land of Goshen. But we'll pick up with 44, Lord willing, next week.